For years, I have had a huge fascination with modern day ideological struggles. Communists versus National Socialists, for example. And one thing that I have noticed in the whole war, the whole modern day war between the left and the right, is that you have in this struggle a duality of how they present themselves. What do I mean by that? So, on one side, the right wing side, you have the force that presents itself as the force for order. And then on the other side, you have organizations, a network of organizations that will present themselves as the force for chaos, the force of rebellion. Both sides, once they are victorious, will lead to the same thing, and that is chaos and misery. But nonetheless, their marketing skills are very effective in that they each appeal to a certain type of person. The right wing appeals to the people who want order, and the left wing appeals to people who want rebellion, right? They want open rebellion against established institutions like the church or the current day government and all that stuff. The right wing side will also promote rebellion, but they will promote rebellion against governments that are perceived as left wing, or that are Marxist, or that have the obvious trappings of Marxism. And they say, we need to have a righteous revolution for the cause of order. And you see this constantly, right? You see this continuously. It's like you can anticipate it perfectly. It's really, really obvious. You have the international communist and you have the national socialist. The national socialist presents himself as someone who believes in tradition, someone who believes in order and harmony, someone who believes in morals, the force of morality. And even though they don't believe in these things at all, even though they hate morality, even though they hate order, they nonetheless will present themselves in such a fashion as a way to appeal to the people who want order and the people who want tradition. This is why the Nazis were so appealing to monarchists. And this is why you had people in the Center Party, in the Catholic Center Party of Germany, who thought that Hitler could bring back some sort of a Christian order in Germany. They actually believed that Hitler would bring great protection for the Catholic Church, and that didn't really happen. Millions of Catholics in Poland were murdered by Hitler's regime. But then you have the international communist, and the international communist, he presents himself as a rebel, as an open rebel, and he will say, we need rebellion against the church. We need atheism. Let's reject a lot of these old traditions. This is why the Bolsheviks were some of the first people who pushed for the idea of women's suffrage, the idea of having women or giving women the right to vote. And they said, for so many centuries, the church has oppressed women. Well, we need to give them freedom. And this was a form of rebellion. And if you look at the history of women's suffrage, if you look at it in its oldest forms and in its beginning stages, it was openly about rebellion against established institutions. And I don't really see a whole lot of people talking about this duality in the ideological conflicts of the modern age. You have people who say the left wing is great. We need to follow them because they are going to give humanity freedom and liberty. But then you have the other side, the right wing side, that says, no, we need to follow the right wing. They are amazing. But you have very few people who can actually look at this in a more balanced view and say, no, actually what's happening here is that you have two sides that will both lead to misery and chaos and destruction, but they present themselves in a different way. And in this duality, you have this immense amount of confusion. But anytime you have, let's say, a strong right-wing force that becomes victorious, you will have a vicious left-wing reaction, a vicious reaction from the forces that present themselves as chaotic and rebellious and hysterical. And they will come out even stronger because the right wing have established themselves as the victors. So the left wing, or the people who are openly for chaos and rebellion, will invigorate themselves even stronger because they need that victory. And I don't really see a whole lot of people really talking about this reality. In fact, I haven't really heard anyone bring this up. This is just my own observation. But while I haven't really seen this in current day literature, I have seen this illustrated perfectly in video games. And this is why I called this video how video games, or what video games can teach us about politics. So I'm going to bring up two video games. And these are video games that I have been playing, and they are very, very entertaining. While they are very entertaining, they also give us an illustration of a political reality and an ideological reality as well. These video games are The Division 2 and Far Cry 5. Now, I played Far Cry 5 last year, and I must tell you, it's one of the greatest video games I've ever played. It is really a masterpiece. Like the music, the voice acting, the graphics, the story, it really is an amazing video game, and it really entrenches you into this whole world. Now, what is the game about? Far Cry 5 is a video game that has this very in-depth story. The story is that you have this town, or you have this county, I should say, in Montana called Hope County. And Hope County has been completely taken over by a cult. And this cult presents itself in this Christian way, and the cult is led by a cult leader by the name of Joseph Seed. And Joseph Seed has members of his figurative family ruling everything. And you have Jacob Seed, and you have Hope Seed, and you have, I think, John Seed is another one. And they control the entire county. And they control the entire county in the name of order and morality. And in fact, one of the leaders of the cult, Jacob Seed, makes this very, very obvious. Jacob Seed was my favorite villain to observe because he accurately portrayed the sinister and dark realities of a right-wing cult. Jacob Seed talks about, bringing back masculinity and how we have to boost masculinism and how we have to become hunters and killers and vicious murderers. And it reminded me so much of the heretical ideology of John Eldridge, who talked about being like the lion, and how since God is called the Lion of Zion or the Lion of Judah, we have to be like lions because we're made in the image of God. And a bunch of Mexican narcos actually took Eldridge's philosophy and applied it to its most logical conclusion and killed a lot of people in the state of Michoacan. So, it's a video game, but you can actually find examples like this in reality, especially in Mexico, in Michoacan, where the entire state of Michoacan was put under the control of a religious cult that was influenced by the masculinist ideology and heresy of John Eldridge. Very fascinating. And so the cult takes over, and they are in complete control, and they're very tyrannical. Now, while they have this face of being orderly and being Christian, the cult will slaughter people. The cult will take people into dungeons and horrifically torture them. The cult will give people drugs in order to brainwash them, hallucinogenic drugs, and the name of the drug is called The Bliss. And you're playing this game, and you're totally immersed in this world, and you're going through all of these little villages within the county, and you're fighting off these cult leaders who are really drug dealers. And, as you're fighting them, the cult will have their loudspeakers up, and they'll be playing their choir music, Hope County Choir. And the music is very hypnotic and very, it's like very hallucinogenic. And it's a really fascinating game. Now, what happens, though, eventually? So the game developers, because the game was so popular, the game developers created a sequel to the game, and it's called Far Cry New Dawn. It's not called Far Cry 6, it's called Far Cry New Dawn, because it is a continuation of Far Cry 5. And in this game, you have essentially a civil war between two factions. You have the, crazy far-right cult led by, at this point, Joseph Seed's son. And then on the other side, you have the this group of people called, oh, I forgot their names. Hold on. They were called the Highwaymen, and the Highwaymen are an anarchist group. They believe in anarchy. They believe that there should be no government. They believe, well, they don't say that, but it's quite obvious. These people are complete anarchists. They believe in lawlessness, and they believe in complete chaos. And you can see it in the video game illustrates perfectly like the differences between the two factions. The superficially Christian, crazy, very violent right-wing cult led by Mr. Seed, they have choir music, very harmonious music that can be actually quite beautiful and melodic. And then you have the Highwaymen, and they listen to really violent rap music, and they kill people indiscriminately, and they have absolutely no order. They kill, they do whatever they want. They're completely anarchist, and they end up killing each other. And in this game, the anarchist side, the Highwaymen, they're so bad that eventually you have to side with the cult, the religious cult, in order to defeat the Highwaymen. But at the same time, you have to remember in this whole story that when Hope County was under the control of the cult, it was essentially the same thing, but it was done under the face of order at the same time. And the cult eventually loses, and the Highwaymen take over. And when the Highwaymen take over, it's like, oh, it's really, really bad. But it was really, really bad under the cult. So both factions lead to the same thing, and that is misery. Misery and violence and murder and massacres and all that stuff. And so, but in this game, you can see the duality. It's like you have these two factions. One that presents itself as the force of order, one that presents itself as the force of chaos. There is another example in another video game. This video game is called The Division 2, and I've been playing this game, and I must say it is a very, very well done game. Graphics, the mechanics, excellently done game. It's just very good. The picture, everything, the imagery, it's all very good. Now, in this game, America is hit by a horrific plague that wipes out a tremendous amount of the population. And what you end up with is numerous factions in the United States fighting for power. In this game, you're fighting over DC, and DC is under the control of two factions. On one side, you have the Hyenas, and on the other side, you have the True Sons. The Hyenas are anarchical, they are lawless, and they present themselves quite obviously as the force of rebellion and chaos. And then you have the True Sons. The True Sons are basically, they're like the Freikorps of Nazi Germany. They, are former veterans of the U.S. military. They're very well trained, and they present themselves as the force of order. In fact, at one point in the game, their leader, Mr. Ridgway, says that they simply want to protect the civilian population and bring order back to America. Their symbol is the American flag. Whereas with the Hyenas, their symbol is the anarchist symbol, which is an A and a circle, but it's upside down, so it's very anarchist. And in the game, when you're having gun battles with the Hyenas will actually tell you, no government to protect you now, indicating their very libertarian, anarchist ideology. And in the video game, you have to fight both sides, and both factions are equally violent and equally evil. But nonetheless, they present themselves differently. They market themselves differently in order to appeal to a certain market or a certain people, certain audience. The people who want order and the people who say we want chaos and rebellion. Now, in the game, you eventually defeat both the True Sons and the Hyenas and their they have, I think, an extended group called the Outcast, and you crush all these factions in the game. And you think, okay, the game is finally over. No. It actually just began, because now that those guys are defeated, another force comes in called the Black Tusks. And this is a very well-trained, very well-funded paramilitary organization consisting of extremely well-trained mercenaries who are way better fighters than anything you've ever dealt with before. And so the game illustrates the reality of political conflict, the reality of ideological conflict, how you always have this duality in which you have two sides. One side that presents itself as the force of order, and the other side that presents itself as the force of rebellion and chaos. You can see this in National Socialist versus International Socialist. And you can see this in the French Revolution. One side says, oh no, we need the monarchy. The other side says, oh, well, we need complete rebellion. But I would say with the French, I mean, that's probably not the best example, because with the French Revolution, the monarchy really was the best possibility in that whole situation. So no, I wouldn't say that's the best example, but I would say today, this is what we are dealing with, because we are living in a post-Christian world where the church, Christianity, doesn't have much of an influence as it used to. People are more atheistic. People are very Darwinistic. And so in this context, the reality of political struggle consists of this duality in which you have two sides, both of which would lead to the same things, but they present themselves differently. They present themselves differently. And you're seeing that today. You're seeing that, for example, and this is an example that I really want to bring up because this is so fascinating to me. In the Catholic world, you have one side that says, we need Vatican II, we need a Mass that can be inclusive for all people, we need to throw out all of the whole tradition of the Mass with the Gregorian chant and the beautiful singing and the beautiful altar and the artwork and all that stuff. And we call these Novus Ordo Catholics, Vatican II Catholics, modernist, whatever you want to call them. And of course, this sort of thing can vary from church to church. You can have some Novus Ordo churches that have very beautiful masses with very beautiful singing, but you have other Novus Ordo churches that are completely chaotic and despicable, really. And they have clowns and people holding balloons and all this stuff. But then you have the other side, and these are the trads, the traditionalists. And they say, no, we need complete order. We need to go back to the Holy Mass and all these things. Now, these people are actually right about what they say, in that we need to go back to the traditional way of doing the Mass. It's so much better than the chaos that we see in a lot of modern-day churches. But here's the danger. Here's the danger. You have to be very wary of the fact that a lot of these so-called traditionalists are, in fact, people who will bring in equally nefarious or even more destructive worldviews. So, for example, you have the Vatican II types who say, yeah, we need chaos. They don't say we need chaos, but they'll say, let's do things differently. And it really essentially is chaos. But then you have the trad types who will come in and say, oh, no, let's go back to the old ways. But then they have European nationalism. And I've actually met someone like this. I debated the leader of the Austrian nationalist identitarian movement, Martin Sellner. And he claims to be a traditional Catholic. But at the same time, he says that pagans and Christians need to work together to fight against uncontrolled immigration, as they call it. And if you listen to my debate with him, you will hear him talk about how paganism and Christianity have a lot in common. Now, this is actually worse than what a lot of Novus Ordo people say. Novus Ordo people say, oh, that includes some Muslims, and yeah, let's build some bridges with Islam. And I don't really agree with all that stuff. But at the same time, what a lot of these trads would introduce, if there was, let's say, some sort of a putsch or a rebellion in the Catholic Church, what these trads would introduce would be far more dangerous, far more destructive, because it would be basically a Nazistic neo-paganism. But again, you see this duality even within the Vatican. You see this duality. Oh, one side says, bring in Pachamama. The other side says, no, we don't need Pachamama, but we need European nationalism. You see this in the whole Amazonian Synod controversy that's still ongoing. One side said, no, put the Pachamama idol on the altar. But then you have Alexander Schugel from Austria who will come in and take the Pachamama statue, throw it in the water, and he's presented as a hero, and he says, oh, I hate paganism. But then when I spoke with Mr. Schugel, and you can see the video in my channel, and I said, do you denounce the pagan, nationalist, Austrian identitarian movement? He refused to denounce it. And you would think someone who hates paganism so much, you would think he could simply just give a simple denunciation of this pagan group, but he couldn't. Why? Because he is a part of that duality, and he's a part of that other side of the duality that presents itself as the force of order, but in reality they are the force of evil. Be very careful what you follow. When you think you are following a savior, you are in fact following an antichrist. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.